I'm Noelle Stensrud, and we are working on capturing some of the history of the Chisago Lake schools. And today we have two current or former administrators, which I'll let them introduce themselves. And they're going to tell us about what they know about the years when they were active in the schools. So, welcome.
Well, my name is Warren Retzlaff, and I was because I retired in 2011. I was principal at Lakeside for 27 wonderful years. I came in 1984 and retired, like I said, in 2011. And before that, I was a principal in the Unity School District in Balsam Lake for 1 year. And before that, I was principal at Stewart, Minnesota, another small town out by Hutchinson, for 1 year. And before that, starting in 1972, I was a teacher, a fifth grade teacher and a coach of quite a few different sports in a small town called Goodhue, Minnesota, which is real close to Red Wing, from 1972 to 1982.
Very good.
And I'm Bob Meyer. I'm the Director of Community Education. I started here in 1992. I'm currently still employed and working. Before that, I was the director in Storm Lake, Iowa for a couple of years. I started community education down there. And prior to that, I was in South Washington County Schools as a community education coordinator. And I was also a football coach and a track coach there.
So what brought you to Chisago Lakes?
I started my administrative degrees back in 1980 or so, and my goal was to be a principal. And in those days, it wasn't real easy to get into a job, certainly in your own hometown of where you were teaching. So I had to start in a real small school at Stewart, which was, the whole district was smaller than Lakeside. And then from there I went to Unity, and that was a bigger school. And that was, maybe, I'm going to guess 1,500 kids total, which was a nice school. But it was in Wisconsin. And there's nothing wrong with that unless you look toward retirement, because it doesn't count toward your Minnesota retirement. So I really wanted to get back into Minnesota. And I had a friend that I taught with who actually was my assistant basketball coach down at Goodhue that grew up and lived and went to Lakeside School as a student. And she told me about this, so I applied, and one thing led to another, and I got the job, and I was tickled pink to come here to Chisago Lakes in the land of lakes. So.
Who interviewed you?
Well, it was Don Bungham was the superintendent, and Dr. Overgaard was on, Mary Ann Cook was on, Mrs. Anderson was on there, and there are 2 or 3 others now that aren't long gone too, but they were all on that first interview committee. Mm-hmm. I still remember that day. It was in the area of the primary school when the district offices were in the office area of the primary school, and you had to walk around boxes so you wouldn't trip to get to the makeshift boardroom, which was the size of maybe a Suburban or something like that. It was really small and tight in there. Never forgotten that. Yeah, it's fun times.
How did you end up here, Bob?
Well, back in the early 90s, I was at Storm Lake, Iowa, but I knew I was going to come back to Minnesota. The community education programs statewide are really the best in the nation, and I knew I was going to end up back in Minnesota. And the opening came up in 92. It was a district I was a little familiar more with the hunting and fishing, because I lived in Cottage Grove. We spent a lot of time coming up to Carlos Avery to hunt and, of course, to fish the lakes. So that alone was enough for me to come back.
Describe the school district when you came.
Well, the buildings were pretty much situated where they are right now. The primary was K through 3. Lakeside at the time was grades 4, 5, and 6. The junior high at the same building it is now, which is a middle school, was 7, 8, 9, and then the high school had the 10, 11, 12. We were really packed at Lakeside, and we needed some more room, and the idea was to do some transferring of students anyway. So it happened in the spring of '85, a bond issue was passed. I think it was the spring, but it might have been fall, but maybe spring. And they started building the new school, at least our addition, And the theory was in the fall of '85, half the third grade from the primary school would move to the Lakeside school. So they would be K1 and 2 and half the third grade. And then Lakeside changed from 4, 5, 6 to half the third grade to 4 and 5. And then the middle school went 6, 7, 8. And the high school was the one that really grew, and they went 9, 10, 11, and 12. I think everyone was really happy with that, except maybe the high school, because they got a whole new grade. You know, the primary got rid of half the third. I got rid of the sixth grade. The middle or the junior high got rid of the ninth grade. So it worked out really well. Again, at the time, even philosophy-wise, it was the junior high. It wasn't a middle school yet. They made a philosophical change a few years later. Then also, like we were talking earlier, a pool was built as part of that bond referendum. And Bob can tell you more about that because he was probably directly involved, but that came to fruition a couple years, 2 or 3 years later. And so the configuration of the whole district is just as it is really today, except we now, of course, Taylor's Falls is a part of the district. And next year there'll be a whole different dynamics with the new Lakeside building being put up.
So when I came, the big change really was the consolidation. We spent our first year here finalizing the consolidation with Taylor's Falls. And the grade configuration was set. I mean, that wasn't going to change. But the idea was to take that, both the TF board and the Chisago board, we took all the members, and then we had a plan to continue to reduce that down to the current size that the board is now.
So you were part of that then?
Right.
Okay.
In that time, they had actually 2 board meetings,
Right.
didn't they? With
Yeah.
Mr.
Well, the
Williams?
first year, then they had a combined board meeting for a year.
Yes, yeah.
What kind of school populations are we talking about?
I would say in general, I'm going to take a guess at my memory that we were in the 1,600 maybe or something like that, high teens-wise total population. Lakeside usually was in the 400 area range. Just later on then toward the
90s.
then we started
Consolidation.
We got, all of a sudden we got to be up to 600 and some in the building, and Lakeside was packed.
Right.
And I know some of the other buildings, middle school
Yeah.
might have been too, because that was one of the reasons we're looking for a change in one of the bond referendums later, which you would
Right.
remember.
Yep.
This is maybe getting ahead of ourselves, but Lakeside then possibly would have moved to the middle school, and the middle school would have moved to the high school and then built a new high school.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we'd had a lot more room. So we just, and it didn't pass, so we all kind of just hunkered in and
Yeah.
made the best use of all the space, because there were a lot of new programs expanding and exploding in terms of that you needed room for. Special ed was growing and growing in terms of federal government dollars and what we needed to provide for kids and things, which made it that much tighter.
Right. Yeah, so when you looked at that, the consolidation brought, a couple hundred kids right away to the middle school and high school. And they knew by working on the consolidation, they were going to have to do something with buildings. They thought at that time would be the high school. So the effort really, the first 3-4 years, was working on trying to pass a high school.
So how many bond referendums do you recall that they tried to pass on?
Yeah, it was early 90s. 93, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Okay.
I would say there were 6. If I recall right, there were 6 referendums to try and pass a high school before we settled on just doing remodeling and additions.
And that,
Yeah, one was for the addition onto the middle school, and then the changes and additions onto the high school. I think the year before that, didn't they do something in the elementary, the primary
Yeah,
school?
I think the primary added some, they added some new classrooms
Right.
also as part of that,
Oh,
because
part of
they
it.
were,
Yeah.
okay. I was trying to keep that one straight.
Well, I think there were a couple of neighborhoods being added to the community. Back then, Lake, what was it called? Morningside, and then the one over here just south of the high school. Those were just being developed back in the mid to late 90s. And so we had a number of households move in at that point too. Yeah, and housing market was really growing. I mean, that was the the early 90s. We weren't into that boom yet, or that bust, 2008. So from 99 until 2006, mortgages were easy to come by, and people were buying houses and building them.
And I always thought too, like in the early 70s or middle 70s, gas prices jumped to 50 cents a gallon. It was an outrage. And then they keep jumping up, and all of a sudden, once gas not only stabilized, people got used to it.
Right.
So then they really made a conscious decision, I think, for their kids' sake.
Right.
Let's live out in the country, and I'll be willing to commute into the traffic, but we want our kids to go to a school that isn't this great big suburban school with 600, 700 kids a grade, and they'll have a much better chance to participate. They won't get lost in the crowd. And we always thought that Chisago Lakes was a school it was never really big, but it was never so small that you were lacking in things we could afford to provide for kids. So I think that was, at least I always thought that was part of the reason some of our growth came, that they were willing to do the commute.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, especially at the middle school.
Right.
They had them there. You probably were involved in that,
Yeah.
Bob.
Yeah, well, I bet you there was 2 big units.
I thought there were like 6 or so, but I'm not sure how many total
Well, there
classrooms.
was 6 classrooms in a unit.
Yeah, was there? Okay.
Yeah. Because remember, we had the units out there, and then we moved them to TF.
Yes, yeah. They used them for.
They used them for a while. Yeah, so we had portables at the middle school to help, and there were portables behind the high school. I don't remember which classes were there.
I'm not sure.
But there were 2 buildings outside the high school, right between the high school and the track.
They
Well,
said
until we
only,
passed the
They said
referendum.
only for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And it must have
It
been.
might have been 8 or
Yeah.
8 maybe. It might have been 8 years before we actually got them built.
I remember those, but I think our kids were.
Yeah.
Because that was '07, right, that we did that building project?
Yeah, I think so.
So what, in looking back, what have been some of your greatest challenges?
Well, mine came after my first year. When we were building that building at Lakeside, or the additions, they took the middle part down, which lost all my 4th grade, and wiped out some of the front part too, which was another couple classrooms. And then we were actually adding 4 4th grade classrooms on the southwest end, which are still there. And also a whole new media school, or center. And it was promised that we would be ready to move in September 1st. Well, we had the 4th grade and the media and a variety of other things all in the gymnasium at Lakeside until Thanksgiving. And I was there, working during the summer, and there were days there would be 1 person working or no people working. So I still recall this. I gave Mary Ann Cook a call, and she was up there in 20 minutes.
And Marion Cook was
One of the school board members. The next day, there was a crew of 12 there. I remember that. That was probably one of the bigger logistical.
And did the teachers handle it?
Oh, they did. My office actually was then in the custodian room inside the kitchen. So that's where I was at. And if you do a teacher review or an interview or a parent, you'd have to open the door, have the parent or teacher come in, then go around and shut the door, and then we sat like this. So now it was kind of, you look back at it, you just laugh now. But yeah, the teachers handled it well. Of course, the kids will handle anything you throw at them if they have to. That's no big deal. But it was kind of fun, actually.
I think one of my biggest challenges really was the referendums, the early years of the referendum. I remember Darrell Williams coming in and basically telling me that, in his opinion, we weren't going to pass a referendum until he left. And that was because they got personal. It wasn't about the facts, about what the need was. It was Darrell and a couple of community members butting heads. And he said they will not support anything that goes on the table till he leaves. And the year after he left, the fall after he left, spring, we passed. He's the second.
Don Bungham was the superintendent when I was hired, and then Darrell came right after
Right.
him. In fact, I was only here for 2 years, I think, and then Don Bungham was retiring.
Retired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then,
There have been 6 superintendents since Chisago Lakes.
and I had 5 of them, I
Formed,
think.
yeah.
Or
And I had
4 or 5.
Would you name them in order that you would know?
Don Bungham, Darrell
Darrell
Williams, Tom Dickhoot, Mike McLaughlin, Joe Tim, and now Dean Jennison.
Any favorites?
That's unfair.
I'm just kidding.
All of them.
For me, it'd be everyone but Joe Tim. But then I didn't have him.
Yeah, that's right.
So tell me an accomplishment you were proud of in your areas that you were at.
Well, for me, it's the establishment of a family center. We had early childhood classes, and they were actually in the old district office at the primary school when I first got here. So it was really like only 2 rooms. But we were able to grow that program with the help of the county and the family collaborative dollars back in the mid-90s when those dollars became available. And eventually it came to establish our own site, the old family center in the old bowling alley, which the Carlsons converted to a family center for us. So we were able to really establish and then grow early child and family literacy programs, as well as our preschool programs. The mid-2000s is when preschool started to take off, and we really established those programs. So early ed, I think, is one of the major accomplishments of the department here in the last few years.
Could you just explain for someone who has no idea about the system?
Right. Community education really is now unique to Minnesota. It wasn't maybe a third of the states, but Minnesota has established itself as the community education leader in the nation. There aren't any other programs that fund it the way Minnesota funds it. We receive levy dollars to provide general services in community ed, but even those levy dollars are relatively small compared to most of the operating budgets. Every school district in Minnesota has community education, but in say Wisconsin, I would say maybe a fifth of the districts in Wisconsin have community ed because their funding is significantly different than what we have. In community ed here in Minnesota, for our program, for example, we raise about 85% of the budget every year in fees. So it's a fee-based program. So if my budget's $1.7 million, 1.4 of that is being raised in fees every year to operate the program. And we basically have our areas of focus are adult enrichment, so offering things for adults, youth enrichment, early childhood, and preschool programming, and then school-age care is a big offering as well. Most school districts have some type of offering similar to that.
And these are all done after or before school hours?
Yes, typically because there isn't any space. It's all classroom space. Now, with the addition of the community center coming on board, that's going to allow us to do programming during the day, or more programming during the day, because we have space. There's some smaller districts where they're seeing a drop in enrollment, so their buildings are empty, and those districts will do programming during the day to keep those buildings in use. And we work with the principals all the time, and by state statute, we could say we're going to book every classroom. We don't really do that, especially at the elementary. There's too much personal property in those desks to really hassle with trying to get those, the adults in those programs. There's enough auxiliary rooms, like an art room, a cafeteria, a gymnasium, music rooms, where we can go in and use those spaces without really getting into the personal property that's in those desks. And the high school is different. They don't have desks like that, So those rooms are where we really do a lot of our programming for adults is at the high school, because that's all just open, desks, and there's no personal property to worry about.
But you also serve on the state board, correct?
Yeah, we have the Minnesota Community Education Association is housed here in Lindstrom. So their staff is here. So we know a lot of what's going on statewide, legislatively. We kind of have an inside track. I work with the lobbyists a lot through the association. They're lobbyists.
Back to our proudest accomplishments.
Well, there's just a lot of things you could be, really kind of proud of at an elementary school. One of the biggest jobs I had in most principals is hiring staff. And I think that in itself is an accomplishment if you think your staff has done a wonderful job, which I always thought that. Another thing is that I always thought we had a great accomplishment was how we worked with Lakeside and the primary school. It was 2 separate buildings, two separate dimensions in terms of classrooms, but they had to work really well together because really there was a K-5 for many years. And the PTOs worked with us as a one building or one school system, but two buildings separate. And I was also very proud of our ability to prepare kids and how we worked and communicated with the middle school also, because that's really important, because that was really one of the scariest things for our kids as fifth graders come spring is, I'm going to the middle school. And of course, really, in reality, it took them about 5 minutes in their first class, and it was like home to them. But those are just some of the accomplishments, I think, that rather than get into the awards certain schools win, or Odyssey of the Mind, or all the programs we've started, or new math programs, new reading programs, new science, there's all those that just are just part of your job. So
Those are really great accomplishments, and we did always hire the best staff that you could.
well,
And they stayed a long time.
oh yeah, not many moved,
Yeah,
which is
says a lot.
wonderful.
Grade, the sixth graders belong with the older kids and fifth graders with the younger ones?
They do if the philosophy changes from a junior high, I think, from a junior high to a middle school, in terms of a little more freedom, and you're treated as a little bit older student. Junior high philosophy is more elementary, grades, moving together, whatever. Middle school is more freedom, some personal responsibility, and things like that. So you put those sixth graders, my observation from a distance, because I was never a principal there, I thought it fit in well with how the middle school in our school district worked. It worked really well, I think, for those kids. So,
What changes have you seen in education?
security. That's probably the biggest thing, and I'm sure it's a lot different now that I've been gone for 7 years, but security is something, when I started in the 70s and 80s, even early 90s, what, wasn't even really a factor hardly. We never thought of someone that could, but it got to a point where now security is really a number one thought, I think, in almost every teacher and every paraprofessional and certainly every administrator and school board. So that's probably one of the biggest things in my eyes. A lot of things have changed, the math curriculum, reading, but and people say the kids have changed. Well, kids, to me, kids are like today like they were in the 70s maybe. They did the same things right, they did some of the same things wrong, they make some of the choices that are wonderful, some of them aren't so wonderful, but they're still kids. I think kids today are under a whole lot more pressure, not only internally in the school, but even the outside world. There's just a lot going on in the world that causes hardships for kids to grow up, I think. So that's kind of my...
How about the testing?
That's a major change. I think that was, in the early 90s. We really did a lot of the MCA testing. And it was really the first time where schools, I thought, were starting to be held physically accountable to how they're doing as a school. Not necessarily each individual, but how is that whole school doing? Are they providing what they need? And the good things, it did do some accountability. We had to make sure we're doing this. The bad thing, I always thought it took some of the creativity away from some of the teachers, where they're used to going off on a tangent for kids to learn about everyday life. Well, some of the everyday life things that we can teach kids weren't on that test. So we had to kind of gear, our whole curriculum kind of had to change toward those tests. Not that we taught to the tests, but the curriculum itself had to be aware of what the world or what the state is asking us to teach kids.
I would agree with the security, so I won't elaborate on that, but I think the other thing is the whole idea that marketing our schools, we're in a market now, and so we need to make sure we're delivering a product that people want, and that includes making sure that there's school-age care services and that there's after-school things for the kids to do. I mean, these parents they're gone, both parents, and especially in our community, it's 78% commuters, and they want their kids taken care of. And so we're seeing a lot of kids from 6 in the morning being dropped off and not being picked up until 6 at night. So we want programs that meet those kids' needs, during those time blocks that they're not in school as well. And I think people are shopping around. If you're not providing those services, they're going to go somewhere else. And if you are providing good services, we're seeing, and as we're seeing now, people open enrolling. because we're able to provide things that they're looking for.
Speaking of open enrollment, how has that affected our schools?
Well, I think it's affected us by we're seeing the numbers grow. We're seeing more and more students open enroll now. We've, back in the early 90s, we didn't have that. We probably had more kids exit than actually came in. Now we flipped that. We have more kids coming in that are exiting than are exiting.
But it was always a little bit of a challenge because that last week before school, you had the classroom
Yeah.
set, you had the teacher set, and all of a sudden you wish you could pick if a girl came in or a boy come in, but it doesn't really work that way. It could be 8 guys, it could be 9 girls, and all of a sudden you've got unbalanced classrooms. So it was a little bit of a challenge that way to get everything balanced and worked out at the last minute.
You still see that?
Oh, yeah.
Last minute?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
They show up, like right here?
Yep.
Didn't think-
This week coming up, we'll see it.
Oh, we saw them the first day of school.
Yeah.
They just show up and they
No, we just
they
added
float.
a third grade section at Taylor's Falls.
Sure.
Yeah, so now we're up to 3 sections of every grade at Taylor's Falls.
And the bigger the school, it's the little easier it is
Right.
to handle it because you can spread them out. I know Taylor's Falls had more challenges doing that than Lakeside because they had fewer sections.
Right.
So if 5 showed up at Taylor's Falls and 5 showed up at Lakeside, it was easier for us to absorb the 5 than it was
Right.
for the Taylor's Falls building.
And the other change too is the K. We went from half-day K to full-day K.
Sure.
I mean, that's, you
Facilities.
double your rooms right there. And with the push with preschool now wanting, the idea to go full-day preschool,
Sure.
that would be a whole nother building project for us.
How do the costs of special ed fit in? Isn't that real expensive?
Yeah, there is, and it's a lot of individual help. So it takes maybe one teacher with 3, 2, 5, 6 kids. So the dynamics of the ratio of kids to teacher are a lot smaller. So it gets more expensive. And yes, it is federally funded. But from my experience, and this is back 7 years, we were never fully funded the way it was promised to be, to fund everything that the laws said we had to provide. So that was a struggle, coming up with the dollars to make sure those kids had the appropriate and proper education for them also.
And you'll see that the legislative platforms for any school district or consortium of schools is to increase special ed funding, because it is one that is really, really hurting our general fund.
Do the feds impact, how would you do more than the state, or?
In special ed, they do. Yes.
Well, no child left behind.
Yes.
I mean, so whatever the main thing that the federal government wants you to do, like No Child Left Behind, our state education system had to try and figure out a way to implement that, which in effect affects the local district.
And where did the dollars come from?
Right, if the dollars come.
Yeah.
Right. And for the most part, we don't have a great deal of money from the federal government. Title I.
For example, when I first came to Lakeside, I think for the first of the 27 years, for 16 to 18 years, Lakeside didn't get any Title I.
Right.
Because we didn't qualify, because it is determined by your free and reduced lunches. And we had so few, but then as the years went on, then we did qualify. So we were able to get some of those dollars to provide some of those paraprofessionals to help kids. But yet we still provided those paraprofessionals. But like Bob said, their salaries came out of the they came out of the general budget.
Right.
So,
We get about 60% reimbursement from the state on our special ed instruction.
What are the surrounding school districts that surround our school district? And just give me a capsule of what you think of. Forest Lake, North Branch, Stillwater, St. Croix Falls, I don't know, who's around us for school district?
you named a few there, yeah.
Well, touching our boundaries, that
Yeah.
is it.
Yeah.
Stillwater doesn't touch our boundary,
Wyoming, Forest Lake, North Branch,
and that's it. I mean, Rush
I
City
think-
maybe on the top.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah, it wraps around a little bit.
Wyoming isn't their own school.
No, that's
they're part of Forest Lake.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, is Forest Lake a big player and we're like kind of a medium player compared
Yeah, they're
Well, by
much bigger.
size,
Like I think they have like 8 or 9 elementary buildings
Right, right.
between Scandia, Wyoming, Linwood, Columbus, Forest Lake Elementary. There's 5 right there, and I
And they
can't
have
remember them all.
2 or 3 middle schools,
Yeah.
and 1 high school.
But I have a story on that when you say surrounding districts, what people thought of Chisago Lakes. When I first came, my first year here, as a principal of one of these surrounding districts, not one we mentioned, but very close, in our conference. And we were talking about it, and he pulled me aside. He said, you know, Warren, here's what we do at our school. We kind of just sit back and look and watch, and we kind of see what Chisago Lakes does. And then we study it, and more than likely, then we do what Chisago Lakes does. I thought that was, and I was new. I was only here a year. I won't even mention the school or the principal that told me this, but I thought that was really a compliment to me when I was here a year but didn't know our reputation that well.
And I think as you look at SCRID and how SCRID operates, it's kind of how it operates now.
Explain what SCRID is.
SCRID is the St. Croix Education District for Special Education Services. So we have a group of school districts kind of pooling our dollars to make sure that a special ed director is hired and the services that are required through special ed law are provided by that consortium. We make up about 48% because of the size, but I think SCRED leans towards what Chisago Lakes is doing as well in terms of what they're going to provide or develop for the other districts within the consortium. What'd you say?
Yeah. And we couldn't really afford all the services just by ourselves either.
Right.
So we have to share some.
So what do you see in the future of Chisago Lakes? What's on the horizon, in your opinion?
Well, I think growth is going to be driven by new buildings. When you build that lakeside out there, you know, in Carmel, I think around the surrounding area is going to see housing come in. So you're going to have growth there. We're going to try and address that at the primary school too. We're trying to look at a remodeling project there. I think the idea of a community center where we're really focusing on getting the community in the school is a really good thing. I think that will provide levy support if we do it right. If we're actually getting the community back into the buildings, I think you're going to see other referendums come down the pike have tremendous support because of that.
And I would agree with all that. In fact, my personal opinion is I think we're going to grow maybe as much, if not more, than we have just lately. I just think there's a wave of people that want to continue to get out away from the metro area as the metro spreads and grows. And the Community Ed Center, what I thought, and one of the reasons, there were many, I voted for the bond referendum. I thought the Community Ed Center and all that it's going to provide for the community is going to be a real draw, not only to the people that live here already, but let's face it, people scout out schools today for their kids and to see what they have, and they're also looking forward, and not just first and fifth grade, it's what will they have at the middle school and what will they have at the senior high for programs. And they see that Community Ed Center, and I think that's just going to be a real draw. I can relate to a town like Becker. If you've ever seen their facilities like that, they've had facilities way in advance of most schools, and that school and a lot of them over there have grown leaps and bounds. I think that's one reason too, and I think this will really help. And of course, the Lakeside School, I think that's going to provide an avenue now that I'm guessing space will be addressed for many years. My guess, I haven't seen the plans or how it's being built, but I would guess it's going to take care of the space issue, at least at the elementary level, for a long time.
You know, we have a new tagline, Learning for All, and I think that really is a good tagline for us because we're taking that all, meaning everybody, not just K-12 students or pre-K students, but it's everybody. And that's the whole thing we're going to do. Yeah.
So do you have any advice for the Chisago Lakes School District for the future?
No, the person that replaced me is a lot smarter than I am, so there's really not a way I could give her any advice. And I think she's doing an awfully good job. I think it's going very well the way it looks to me. I mean, from the day I came, and I'm sure before, and certainly since for all the newcomers, I think the school district is run really well. There's always glitches, there's always problems, there's always things, but There's a reason this district is highly thought of around the state.
Yeah, and I think that really starts with the board. Board of Education has been very committed to the school system, and it's very, very consistent. We've had board members for a long time that have really laid a good direction, and they've allowed administration to do their jobs.
That's really a good point. I should have thought of that too, because one thing I often say is we're very lucky to work in Chisago Lakes District because we have a school board that really does put kids ahead of most anything, including politics. Because I know some of these other districts, there's people on the board because of one or two reasons, and they're really a hindrance to getting things done. But
Right.
from the day I came, and I've seen a lot of boards, so have you, Bob.
Yep.
They've been always positive, always willing to help, and they'll always say, what do you need to get the job done? And that's always greatly appreciated.
Yep.
Are we just seeing the graying of this area where the kids all move away and the old people stay?
Well, we do have a pattern where people do move back, usually when they have kids. But you're also right about the graying. I mean, we do have a lot of people moving out here that are retired because of the lakes and the ranches and whatnot. But I don't think that the graying population is going to outpace the family population. They are right now, and that's to be expected with housing the way it is. Once that housing flips, I think you'll see a lot more families moving out here.
And from the experience I've had at the other districts I worked and lived in, there are more young, like you said, more young people coming back here to this town because it's home, this school district because it's home, than ever any place I've been. I have a son that lives here, and it seems like half his class still live here.
My daughter moved back.
Yeah.
One of my daughters moved back.
Is this high school like 80% to capacity for population? And
I would say that this high school can probably handle about 350 a class, and we're currently at about 270. It's all about programming at a high school level.
Yeah.
It's not so much housing the kids.
And I can only speak to Lakeside, and I can't speak very well from 7 years, but I think Lakeside is packed.
Yeah.
From my speaking with Sarah Johnson, the principal there now, I think they're using every available spot there is.
Yeah, they're at 8 sections, and the new building was built for 8, and we're already adding 4 new classrooms.
Already.
Yeah, before it's even done, we've added 4 additional classrooms. The board approved that this summer, so we're adding 4 classrooms on the lakeside already.
what about the middle school? What percentage are they packed?
You know, that's a fairly large building, so I think that can handle about, 350 as well.
Could be, yeah.
That's a big building.
What was our biggest class so far?
Boy, I think that was in the early 90s, right after the class. I want to say it was about 309.
3 something, I was gonna say
About
315.
310, yeah. And we're starting to see that change. I mean, 4 years ago, we had 205K. This year, we have 246. So that has now started to shift again. I know last year, the largest open enrollment was preschool. More open enrolled families for preschool than anything else. When you look at the open enrollment numbers, we do see a number come back in the 5th, 6th, and 7th grade level. But it doesn't show as open enrollment because it's kids who are in our district but may have attended Scandia Elementary or Wyoming. But once they get through the elementary, we see them come back as middle school kids. And it doesn't show as that open enrollment because they're really our students. So that kind of threw off our research and how we're trying to
And
figure
I
out the
remember
kids.
you giving us an update every so often at the
Yeah.
at the principal administrative meetings about what are the dynamics of the kids pre-kindergarten even.
Yeah,
And as
Yeah.
best you could.
right. Yeah.
Well, I guess if I were still a principal and I had a parent come in, I would ask, how is my student going to be treated here? What type of atmosphere is in this school and this whole district? And that was probably the most proud thing I ever had, was what people thought of our school system. And of course, I had more specific knowledge about our building at Lakeside. And to this day, one of the proudest things I have is when a student that's already graduated or whatever has come back, and I've met former students getting off mountains in Colorado. I've met students in Utah, going through Utah, they come up to me and say, boy, we remember fond things about Lakeside. And what's even more cool to me is when they say something nice about one of the teachers I hired. And that happens a whole lot more. But that was one of the most important things to me, is what those parents and students especially felt when they walked through that door. You wanted it to be their second home.
That's the whole thing. Always have some type of contact with kids that have gone through the system, and they'd come back in a second if they could.
Yeah.
Okay, we passed building a new elementary over at Carmel, off of Carmel. It will be for grades 3, 4, and 5. And we're looking at opening that facility up in August, a year from now.
Is that 3, 4, 5?
2, 3, 4. I'm sorry, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, we moved to grade. Yep.
And the district office.
And the district office, yep. And then the primary school, the second grade will move out, and so the family center, the early childhood program, will move into a wing at the primary school. So we will expand that. We'll go from 2 preschools to 4 preschools, and then have designated rooms for kids club, as well as parenting classes. The community center is starting to put up walls today.
The Wildcat?
The Wildcat Center, thank you. That will have a 200-meter indoor track with 4 basketball courts on the main floor, and there'll be a raised walking track above that. Off the walking track will be a cardio fitness area, and below the cardio fitness area will be a new weight room. There will also be 2 community rooms that will be available for public, and then the community education offices will also be moved over. There's a gymnastics studio being built as well, and then some renovation to the pool in terms of the locker facilities are being installed as well. So Taylor's Falls, we're going to be adding a new media center and a community room in that end. Those will be the additions. And then inside, they will remodel the old media center into 2 preschool rooms, and then convert one of the classrooms into a kids club area. So the middle school will have some security work done on the 3rd floor, adding in some new walls there, some new security doors, and then part of where the gymnastics studio used to be will be converted to a fitness area for Fayed there. That's a new requirement for middle school students. And that's about what we're going to do. And the tennis courts were added over there as well.
Oh, yeah.
So 10 courts over there, as well as 6 pickleball courts.
Pickleball.
Yes.
That's the way we did say it.
And then what about the high school? You're doing some agricultural?
Yeah, we're doing a CT, the career tech area is being added. There's 2 classrooms being added there, 1 ag science, 1 career tech. And then, of course, the greenhouse has to be rebuilt.
And thank you for all that you guys have contributed all these years. Because again, longevity builds programs and builds community. And you guys have done a fabulous job in both those areas. So.
Thanks.
Well, we both live here.
Anyway, thank you guys.
You bet.
Thanks, you guys.